compelling.
The high plains of Kansas and the northeast corner of the land of enchantment.
It's Monday.
The land of EWTN all across the Lone Star State.
It's GRN Alive.
Bringing you faith, fun, and facts.
Live from the studios of the Guadalupe Radio Network.
Join us on the show. Call
877-757-9424.
877-757-9424.
Praise be to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to GRN Alive, Monday edition. Happy Memorial Day. That sounds very weird to say Happy Memorial Day, considering what it is we are memorializing, what we are remembering, the death, the last full measure of so many who have given their lives in combat for others, so that others might live. Over the weekend, I watched the movie, The Last Full Measure. It had a stellar cast, actually. Samuel L. Jackson. There was just so many people in this film. And it was an inspirational story based on a true story of an airman in Vietnam who gave his life to save these army grunts. And it took decades before he was finally recognized for his heroism and awarded posthumously the Medal of Honor. It's called The Last Full Measure. And I would recommend you watch it. Now, it wasn't the most greatest produced film, I would have to say. It felt a little mechanical, but the story is very inspiring, so you should check that out. But today we're going to be talking about Memorial Day, as well as we have some pro-life news with Teresa Camara, who's here. Tim Mott is off. David Magianis is off. Adrian Fonseca is here. But I'm going to share with you some stories, maybe some that you've never heard, maybe that you have. I don't know. We're going to find out. But in our guest segment, we're going to be interviewing Zechariah Long from the American Society for the Defense of Tradition, Family, and Property, the TFP, Student Action. Have you heard of these guys? Let me tell you something. For the past several years, they've been holding the front line against these story times at public libraries where the transgender people will sit there and read to these children in drag. I mean, it's just horrific to see that. They've been protesting and praying outside of those. Black masses, they've been there as well on the front lines, and we'll get a story behind that. Who are these people? What are they all about? Why do they do it? But also, what brought them to my attention this weekend was this video that I saw on YouTube called The Ballad of an American Night. And when it was sent to me, it reminded me of the late, great Doug Pearson, who was a friend and a colleague here at the Guadalupe Radio Network, who died several years ago now of cancer. Marine. You know, he was 7 foot tall and massive and just this big, strong guy. And it was a painful process to watch Doug wither away in his final days. And I stood by his bedside just a couple of days before he passed, and he embraced his crucifix. And he took it with every ounce of strength he had left. And as I was crying by his bedside, begging the Lord to take away his cross, Doug looked at me and he said, "Who are you to take away the cross my Lord has given to me?" Doug told me I was supposed to read the story of Colonel Ripley, and I never did. And when I saw this video recounting the heroic tale of this incredible Catholic, Colonel Ripley, under combat, it reminded me of Doug. And so I thought we'd talk about that today, and I'll share a piece of that ballad too with you later in the show. But we'll be talking with Zechariah Long from TFP, who put the video together and put that out. We'll be talking to them as well. But we're going to get through some news for pro-life news and some stories in honor of Memorial Day first. Let's begin with prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thine intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, I fly unto thee, O Virgin of Virgins, my mother. To thee do I come, before thee I stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer me. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now, we are engaged in a great civil war testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those here who gave their lives, that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or to detract. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here, dedicated to the great task, remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they here gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth." Unquote. Abraham Lincoln. At the Battle of Gettysburg, or at least 4 months later, November of 1863, remembering the so many that died that day on July 4th, there in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. It reminded me of another story of another person, almost 150 years ago today, almost. It was May 24th, 1863, just outside Vicksburg, Mississippi. Grant was contemplating a second all-out assault on the strongest, most fortified city in America during the Civil War, Vicksburg, Mississippi. Like a castle perched high above the mighty Mississippi River, it commanded and controlled the flow of traffic up and down that mighty river. And Grant, who was a rehabilitated Army officer, who left the Army before the war started as an alcoholic, ruined his family's business, and found himself training reservists as the war broke out, was given a field command of the Army of the Tennessee Valley. And the winter leading into 1863, he pushed that army as hard as he could through the swamps of Louisiana to find a way to get onto soil in Mississippi, to take this most coveted prize. As Abraham Lincoln would say, the key to winning the war was Vicksburg. And Grant was so motivated, so driven to take this city that he would ignore orders from Washington, and he would pursue Vicksburg with everything he had. But on May 24th, 1863, he was going to throw everything he had at the most fortified city in the country, who was set high above on their perch. Fortified works, trenches, fields of fire. They had everything. The Confederates had everything to their advantage, and the Union Army had everything against them. A few days earlier, Sherman tried and lost several thousand men in the attempt and was unsuccessful at penetrating the city fortifications. So Grant was going to try one more time, this time with everything he had. All up and down the line, he was going to throw it out. But on May 24th, the day before the decisive action, he knew that he had to ask men to do something that very few men would probably volunteer for. They would have to volunteer to die in order that others may live. So he called for 150 volunteers. He said they had to be single. They could not be married. They could not have children because they would likely die. 300 men volunteered. And of them, one man by the name of Joseph LaBille was in their ranks. He was a private in the 6th Missouri Infantry. Or I said May 24th. I meant May 21st. It was May 21st, 1863, when he volunteered. along with 150 other men. They called themselves the Forlorn Hope, and they knew that they were not going to live very long. Their mission was on the morning of May 22nd, 1863, right at 10 a.m., when all battlefield commanders had coordinated their watches with Grant, the first time in the history of the world to do so. The cannons, having fired for 2 solid hours, would stop precisely at the stroke of 10 a.m., and the Union Army would charge all up and down the line simultaneously. But their job, the Forlorn Hope, was to charge the enemy lines, not with rifles, not with bombs, not with knives or hand-to-hand combat, but carrying logs, to put these logs across a trench that was about 6 to 7 foot wide and about 6 feet deep, right in front of the long hill that would go up. And on top of that moat would be fortified work, and up there would be the Confederate Army, and they would be dropping bombs and shooting, and the chaos would ensue. And they knew that if they could build this bridge over these trenches, this moat, that the regiments that came behind them would have a good shot at getting up to the works in order to penetrate the lines. But they had to do so under heavy enemy fire without defending themselves. These men who volunteered for this job knew that they would likely not make it, and most of them didn't. But Joseph LaBille, whom you've never even heard of, a Catholic, made the sign of the cross and charged, and he was cut down by the enemy. Those that survived that day lived 6 hours in the trenches, huddling, trying to survive. They would throw bombs into the trenches, and they would desperately grab them and throw them back for 6 straight hours. There were many men like that. Joseph was one of them. Medal of Honor recipient for his heroic deeds that day, along with many others. Google it. Battle of Vicksburg, Medal of Honor winners. Look it up. The Forlorn Hope. No greater love hath any man than to lay down his life for a friend. It reminds me of another incredible Catholic who died and gave his life in combat. Servant of God, Father Vincent Capodanno, a Maryknoll priest. Went to Fordham University, came from a good family, one of 9 kids. It wasn't until his freshman year in college that he had let it slip to his friend that he wanted to become a priest. He felt called. He was reading the Maryknoll magazine, Field Afar, every day on his ferry ride to college. And he would read about the heroic tales of missionaries in foreign lands in China, Asia, sharing the good news to souls that desperately needed an encounter with Christ. He felt a zeal to share and to evangelize and to make disciples of all nations. And after he was ordained a priest, he went to the missionary fields in Taiwan, up into the mountains, up until the refugees, the special group of... They were Chinese refugees that came to Taiwan, and they were rejected by the local people. They lived up in the mountains. They had their own dialect, and Father forced himself to learn their language and catechize them, build a chapel, and provide them the sacraments. Maryknoll moved him to Hong Kong, and then he was head of a boys' school, which he didn't like. It was too comfortable. It was too clean. It was too nice. It was too easy. And then Vietnam broke out, and he asked his superiors if he could become a chaplain in the Navy. And they finally granted him permission, and he joined the Navy, and he was shipped off to Vietnam to be a chaplain for the Marines. In 1966, he earned the Bronze Star for his actions in several combat initiatives in that year. He was known for being that guy that no matter what was going on, if they were standing guard in the middle of the night, there was Father Vincent Capodanno standing guard next to the Marines. If they were humping, heavy Alice packs through the thick, nasty jungles and the humid and the heat, he was humping right next to them with his Alice pack on. And there next to them Every time, everywhere, no matter what was going on. And when the combat broke out, Father Vincent refused to stay behind in the safe places. He would be in the battlefield, moving from Marine to Marine, carrying the wounded back to safety, rendering first aid and praying over the dead and the dying. Those that were Catholic would receive last rites. Those that weren't, he would pray with them, pray over them, the Our Father. He would say to them frequently, God is with us all this day. Well, in September of 1967, the North Vietnamese army was determined to interrupt the elections in South Vietnam. So they amassed a great force, and they were on the verge of a great combat. And Father Vincent could feel it on September 3rd, 1967. He felt there was something that was going to happen, and he spent all night in prayer, praying for those that would die the next day. And then when the news came that there was a platoon engaged with 2,000 enemy North Vietnamese army soldiers, he jumped a helicopter to ride out there with the relief force. And he found himself walking with these Marines into this combat situation. And they were at a knoll. And there was a man by the name of Ray Horton, a Marine, a young Marine who acted as Father's altar server the previous day. And he was with Ray on September 4th, 1967. And they were at this knoll, and they could hear just over this knoll the heavy and intense fire. This platoon was pinned down, and many were already wounded and dying, heavily outnumbered and overran. And up over the top of this knoll was a sergeant by the name of Sergeant Pete, a Russian Orthodox fella. And Sergeant Pete said, Marine, you and you and you, follow me. We've got to go take out a machine gunner. Horton was one of those Marines. And they go over the knoll, and Father Vincent follows them. He doesn't stay behind where it's safe. He follows them over the knoll and into the combat. And what he witnesses is this crazy carnage. You see, he spent several hours that day going from foxhole to foxhole, rendering aid, carrying wounded Marines back to safety, ignoring his own safety, ignoring the fact that there's bullets flying all around him, mortars going off all around him. In fact, half of his right hand was blown off from a mortar shell. He had been shot through the arm, his right arm. It was pretty much useless. He was holding it tight to his body, but he refused first aid. He even gave up his own gas mask to a Marine who had lost his because they were dropping CS canisters onto the battlefield in order to try to get some of those NVA soldiers off of the wounded and the dying Marines. When one soldier lost or his rifle became not operable, Father Vincent picked up a rifle and carried it over to him and told him to keep fighting. And he would say, one after the other, going from foxhole to foxhole to foxhole, calm, cool, and collected, as if there was nobody shooting and firing that day. He would look them in the eye and say, Marine, God is with us all today. It's going to be okay. And he would assure them. To the dead he prayed. To the Catholics he gave last rites. Well, Horton got wounded in their effort to take out that machine gunner. Sergeant Pete got mortally wounded. Father Vincent spent 5 minutes with him in his last dying breath, praying the Our Father with him. He ran to Horton's side afterwards, and the corpsman by the name of Leal, which is a medic in the Navy, he got shot through the leg, several feet away, was screaming out for help. Horton thought he was going to die. His blood was pumping out of his body. As his heart was pounding, it just pumped it harder. I'm going to read to you very quickly here a little testimony of Ray Horton, who was there that day. He said, quote, I spotted our corpsman Doc Leal moving my way under fire. He looked at me, and he was alone. I thought everyone else was dead. I prayed to God, for I knew I was bleeding to death, and the NVA were near. I expected a bullet or a bayonet at any moment. As I closed my eyes, someone touched me. When I opened my eyes, he looked directly at me. It was Father Vincent Capodanno. Everything got still. No noise, no firing, no screaming. A peace came over me that is unexplainable to this day. In a quiet and calm voice, he cupped the back of my head and said, "Stay quiet, Marine. You will be okay. Someone will be here to help you soon. God is with us all this day." I noticed he had a lot of blood on his head and his face. His right hand, covered with dirty and bloody bandages, was almost gone. So he blessed me with his left hand. I heard a scream close by. "My leg! My leg!" I was jolted back to my senses. It was Doc Leal, who was sitting holding his leg just a few feet from me. Father Capodanno leaped up and ran to Doc. As he supported Doc Leal, the machine gun that I was supposed to destroy opened up, killing them both. As the first bullet from that gun entered the back of Father Capodanno's head, I knew I had failed in my mission. That was the last time I saw Father Vincent Capodanno, but it wasn't my first. Unquote. That was from the Grunt Padre, Servant of God, by Father Daniel Mode. I encourage you to pick it up and read it for yourself. Ray Harton would leave the faith and struggle with the mental wounds that he suffered, the emotional wounds that he suffered, the PTSD that he suffered for many, many years. It was because of Father Daniel Mode researching the life of Father Vincent Capodanno that put things in place for Harton to come back to the faith, to go to confession, to receive healing in the sacrament, to hear those beautiful words of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ say so sweetly, "I absolve you." So many have given so much. The last full measure. Let us not forget them this day. Rather than barbecues and the days off, or the coronavirus, or the bills, or the stresses that we have in life, let's take just a moment. Let's just take a moment and think of those that have given so much. The last full measure. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Teresa Kamara.
Yes.
Brighten up our day. Bring us to something more positive.
Well, first off, I would like to say also thank you to all the military families because you have lost something very precious in the life of these people. It's not like they're alone. And thank you, Joe, for your service as a Marine. And I want to also send out a thank you to my family members who served into my friends who have also served in the Navy and the Air Force and the Army. And I know some of them have come back with a lot of trauma from seeing their friends that have passed away in a war situation. And it's very hard to see that. But the thing is, I know it's not Veterans Day, but we also want to really draw close to those who have family members and who have friends who died, because they have this brother camaraderie, they have this sister camaraderie that you cannot find anywhere else. And I know even as I'm praying outside of the abortion facility, I actually have had military families come out, and one gentleman I'm thinking of specifically said, I've never had this level of camaraderie since the military, and I can guarantee you the level of stress that we're under out there is nothing at all compared to the stress that they suffer through together and that they work together. So thank you, Joe, for your service. And also, as far as here in the pro-life movement, we do believe that we are standing strong with our military families in the sense of defending freedom for the youngest among us and for the wives in some cases, for the military personnel, that we have seen people in uniform going into the abortion facility. And we'll remind them, we don't want to see anyone left behind. We want to be there for them. And so it's very important to continue to uphold the freedoms that we have here in the United States as citizens, because while they're fighting abroad in many cases, we need to be able to stand up, whether it's for religious freedom, through defending the ability for us to go to Mass, or whether it is the right to life itself. And so right now we're also, the pro-life movement is very much engaged in a specific defense of the name of Norma McCorvey, as a documentary has come out called AKA Jane Roe. And Joe, I actually didn't tell you this, but I actually sang at her funeral.
Really?
Yes, I sang at her funeral. And so I remember being there with Karen Garnett, and I saw that there were so few people and there was so little media. There was only one cameraman there. And I said, what's going on? Like, is there something, like, is there a secret? Like, I know that we all want to be protective. I mean, I saw Mark Crutcher from Life Dynamics, and I saw the Grams from Texas Right to Life. I actually sang with Veronica Arnold from Texas Right to Life. I saw Joe Poyman from Texas Alliance for Life. I saw Karen Garnett, of course, who is now working in another pro-life group, but she was at the time working with the Diocese of Dallas in Respect Life and leading 40 people in that ministry. And the reality is, what she told me was, we wanted to make sure that Norma did not want everything to be publicized. She wanted to be able to live that private life. Her daughter, Melissa, who was her first child, was there leading the funeral. She wanted it to be private. She didn't want a lot of old stuff being brought forward, from her life before she was in the pro-life movement. She didn't want to deal with all of that. And she just wanted it to be able to just kind of have that peaceful repose of it being sincere. And the funeral was, Flip Benham actually spoke at the funeral with his Bible in place. And it brought back all of these memories of reading and watching her on TV from, One by Love. And the reality is, what fascinated me always, growing up in the pro-life movement, was that when Norma McCorvey came out of the abortion industry, and she actually came out because Flip Benham apologized to her for being so harsh. And basically he had said, you should be ashamed of yourself for, helping bring about the legalization of abortion. And when he apologized for being so harsh, she began to realize that he was human and he was treating her as a human being and that he loved her. And she was also very interactive with a little girl named Emily. And she talks about the love that this child out on the sidewalk had shown her. And the reality is that we need to be that light of love for these abortion workers. And we need to, whenever we're getting frustrated and we're seeing that Norma McCorvey's her name is being dragged through the mud, basically, as she was caught in this series, we need to keep in mind that this is an opportunity to show love and forgiveness for the abortion workers. And this gives us the opportunity once again to talk about the fact that abortion is actually killing a child and harming women. Yeah. And so I highly recommend, and I'm going to put up a link to this, that you read over what Priests for Life have posted on the documentary itself, and because they have watched it, and also on what they were saying previously, and how they talk about their 22 years of knowing her, and how that life affirming culture helped to heal her over time, and that she was a very complex person, and that she in many ways she even says in some of the documentaries that I've seen, and I've seen this more than once, where she says, I came from the other side of the track. She didn't feel like she was one of the smartest people in the pro-life movement. And so she, in many ways, was protected and was helped. And I actually, one of the things that keeps coming up is, wow, she made almost $500,000 through the pro-life movement. Okay, well, FYI, I did a little bit of calculations. If she got $10 an hour for 15 years, that's plus the $80,000 for a book signing. That's almost $500,000 right there, and that doesn't count any speaking engagements or stuff. Right. Okay, who's gonna call $10 an hour this huge? Wow, that's so much money. So just keep in mind the fact that however the calculations work, even if Norma McCorvey somehow did change her mind, which there's a lot of evidence showing that she did not. There's a lot, and you can read, like I said, read Priests for Life.
It seems highly manipulated.
It's very, very likely that it was either a twisting of the camera recording or that...
and I think Father Pavone actually provided screenshots of his final text messages with Norma prior to her death. So
and she called Abby Johnson. Abby Johnson actually talked about it. On
Friday with Dave Palmer.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so why would she be encouraging the pro-life movement to say... keep up the fight that I've been saying to end abortion, against Roe v. Wade, literally an hour before she passes away.
Yeah.
That's her deathbed confession. It's continue to defend the unborn, continue to fight for women.
Well, here in just about a couple of minutes from now, we are going to be talking with Zechariah Long from the American Society for the Defense of Tradition, Family, and Property. Before we do that, though, we're going to be sharing with you a little segment from the Ballad of the American Knight. And so I'll play a few minutes of that. But so maybe we can come back to this, Teresa, in the after show. So we do an after show when we go off the air at 9 a.m. Central Time across the Guadalupe Radio Network. We stay on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube for about another half hour to talk about the issues that we've discussed on the show and the after show. I encourage you to stick around for that. But first, I present to you just a little snippet, a portion of TFP's Ballad of the American Knight, based on Colonel Ripley. And we'll talk more about that in just a few minutes from now. Stay with us.
Marxist foes with tanks and soldiers massed upon that Easter day. Dong Na with its massive bridge, their means war charging on their way. Ripley and his men remained intent to stop them in their tracks. Days of constant fire and combat left no moment to relax. Blow the bridge or we're all dead was Colonel Turley's stern command. Ripley wasted little time, his mission clear, the hour at hand. Heavy TNT he hoisted, dangling from the beams outspread. Climbing high through razor wire while bleeding, this is all he said. Jesus, Mary, get me there. Jesus, Mary, get me there. No time to waste, no time to spare. Jesus, Mary, get me there. Jesus, Mary, get me there. Jesus, Mary, get me there. No time to waste, no time to spare. Jesus, Mary, get me there. Back and forth a dozen times he laid the charges as he went, dodging bullets from the foe to kill him. Now they're one intent. When at last he set the charges on those I-beams underneath, lacking means to crimp the wires, he used his only tool, his teeth. Too much pressure and he knew that he'd be gone forevermore. Carefully he clamped each one, then fell down half dead back on shore. Just then Major Smoke ran up the fuses and their wires found. Ripley laid his backup charge and these few words his only sound. Jesus, Mary, get me there.
Welcome back to GRN Alive Monday edition. That was a little segment from the Ballad of the American Knight by the American Society for the Defense of Tradition and Family and Property. Before I bring Zechariah Long on to discuss the TFP and this ballad, the life of Colonel Ripley and his heroic action in Vietnam, and his life as a Catholic as well, I want to just say I encourage you to check out our website, grnonline.com. We've rolled out a new one if you don't know. And we just recently updated it to include a new feature. So when you go to grnonline.com and you allow the browser to know your location, I promise I won't sell your information to Apple or Microsoft, Bill Gates, none of them. Google, I won't give it to anybody. But what it will do is it will customize your experience based on your location. So the local contact information, the local radio station, the local events. But if you look in the far top left corner, you'll see the feature to choose your station. So if you'd like to listen to or see what we're doing elsewhere within the Guadalupe Radio Network, just hit that drop down and you can choose, any one of our 37 stations, even in Spanish as well. So check that out, grnonline.com. Joining us by phone right now is Zechariah Long from the American Society for the Defense of Tradition and Family and Property. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Praise be to Jesus. It's good to have you on, especially to talk about Memorial Day. Before we dive into the ballad and the American Knight, let's start with TFP. Who is the TFP? And maybe you can give us the elevator pitch on the background.
Right, absolutely. Well, the TFP is a a really great and large organization, international. But like you said, just the elevator pitch. So we're tradition, family, and property. They are the pillars of a Christian civilization. And our founder, Professor Plinio, his goal was to fight to defend what's left of and restore Christian civilization. So ultimately, all of our activities are focused around that. So we do many, many things. We organize 23,000 public square rosary rallies across the country every October 13th. I'm sorry, the Saturday closest to October 13th. We do many activities. Another activity, we work with the youth because they are our future. And so we have call to chivalry camps for boys. We organize protests. Right now we're heavily involved in in handing out leaflets and flyers at universities that are open, that is right now, protesting socialism, because right now, as you know, socialism is really a key issue, a hot topic in our national debate right now. So we get involved in the civil debate and try to orient and steer society towards Christian civilization, which of course you cannot have that without the Catholic Church. So of course we're all Catholics and lay Catholics like yourself.
Well, I tell you, some of the activities that have inspired me quite a bit related to the TFP have been the protests outside of public libraries, where the transgenders will come in and they will redo story hours to these kids. And it's insane to think that that's going on. And it's been refreshing to see that a group of Catholics have come together to say this isn't right. It's not right for those suffering with this transgenderism. It's not right for those that will be exposed to this sort of manipulation. And someone needs to be there to pray. It reminds me of the incredible Catholics who will pray outside of the abortion clinic. I know, Teresa, that's near and dear to you and your work and your life. And so I think the TFP has been very inspirational that way.
Well, the TFP has actually in Houston been very involved in coming out and praying outside of the huge Planned Parenthood that is here in Houston.
That's awesome. Yeah, praise God for that.
We definitely do that, yes.
And not to mention, when Adrian and I were out in front of the Black Mass here in the Houston area, the TFP was proudly represented there. And went back even afterwards and stayed there in the middle of the night when it was even more insane. So lots to be thankful for in that regard. Now, Zechariah, how far, you mentioned that they're international, but maybe you can give us a real quick scope of where is the organization in the United States? How many states are represented within the TFP?
Yeah, absolutely. So here in the United States, our headquarters is in Pennsylvania. And we have several centers in Pennsylvania. We have one in Herndon, Pennsylvania. It's actually a school, a boys' boarding school called St. Louis de Montfort Academy. And then we have a center in Washington, D.C. They have a big job there. And then we have centers in the South. Here in the South, we have centers in Houston. We have a center in Lafayette, Louisiana, and a center in New Orleans, Louisiana. We have a center in Florida, 2 centers in California, North and South, and the center in Chicago. And so these centers, the numbers of our volunteers, our full-time volunteers, vary at each one, but more or less an average of 4 members at each center.
And so everybody's a volunteer. There's no full-time, I guess, employees, for lack of a better term?
Correct. We're not paid. We are full-time volunteers, so it's a special calling for each one of us. We intend on staying with the organization and volunteering our life for it. You can leave. You can come and go if you want, because it's you don't take vows or anything like that. But yes, we're full time. We don't get paid. We're provided our necessities by the organization.
We're talking with Zechariah Long with the American Society for the Defense of Tradition, Family, and Property. And so my good friend and colleague here on the GRN Alive Monday show, Adrian Fonseca, who has been our intern now for the past several months, although is very close to graduating college and may have to leave us as a result.
Well, just for the record, I did graduate college. I have my papers now.
You have papers?
I do. I'm kind of an intellectual now.
See, I was going to call some of your professors and scuttle that to keep you longer.
You waited too long.
I did. I missed that. That ship has sailed, apparently. So he texted me a link to this YouTube video, The Ballad of an American Night. And as soon as he did, first time I tried to see it, it was not available. He had to find it on a different YouTube channel and sent that to me, and I watched it finally. And it kind of struck me because years ago, a good friend, colleague here at the Guadalupe Radio Network, Doug Pearson, who died of cancer, and it was a very difficult process to watch him die. Well, before he died, he did a couple things for me. He handed me a rosary, and he challenged me to pray it every day with my family. And the other thing he did, he told me to read the book of the American Night, Colonel Ripley.
Oh, very interesting.
And I'm proud to say that I have taken him up on his challenge, and I've prayed the rosary with my family every day since Doug challenged me. But I am ashamed to say that I've never read the book. And here is Adrian sending me this link, and I'm like, oh, you're trying to shame me. I see how you're doing it. You're trying to stick it to me. I got you, buddy. But it reminded me, it was a wake-up call. It was like I needed to do this. Doug asked me to do it. I should have done it. I haven't done this. And so it was a great reminder to me. And I thought it was particularly good timing given Memorial Day. Even though Ripley did not give his life in combat, he did not die during his combat, but he did something very heroic nonetheless, and it was linked incredibly to his faith. And I think that is still a very good message on Memorial Day. So, Zechariah, maybe you could share with us the story of Colonel Ripley, what he did, and how his faith played a part.
Oh, absolutely. I'm really honored to share Colonel Ripley's story. I can't tell you how much I admire the man, and I'm not the only one, obviously. The book An American Night tells the story of Colonel Ripley, and it's written by a member of our organization, TFP. And Colonel Ripley, like you said, is the ultimate role model, especially a great war hero to remember today, especially on a Catholic radio. He was a great Catholic, a Catholic warrior in the spiritual life, which, of course, made him an incredible warrior on the physical battlefield. He fought in Vietnam on several deployments. In 1972, he was an advisor in Vietnam for a South Vietnamese Marine battalion. And probably the most famous story of Colonel Ripley is when he blew up the Don Howe Bridge. And that kind of, synthesized Colonel Ripley's heroics. And so it was during the Easter Offensive in 1972. And essentially he and his South Vietnamese Marine Battalion were the only ones in the way of the Easter Offensive. So, hundreds of thousands of North Vietnamese trying to cross this one bridge where Colonel Ripley and his Marines were told to stand and hold and die if necessary. So long story short, Colonel Ripley, he had to blow up the bridge. That was their only hope, was to blow up the bridge to stall the Easter Offensive. And this was a fortified bridge, so it wasn't just like, shooting a tank round at it and blowing it up. No, he had to strategically place satchel charges underneath the bridge at, strategic spots to make sure the whole bridge would blow. So that's what he did. But so in order to get underneath the bridge, he had to hand walk, hanging from the I-beams of the bridge. So it was about 100 feet. So he had to hand walk 100 feet, placing satchel charges, TNT explosives, in between the I-beam flanges. And he did that several times. So he placed the explosives, hand walked back, had to get the blasting caps for the explosives. He had to hand walk out 100 feet, place those. He basically hand walked several times back and forth to rig the explosives. And at a certain point, Colonel Ripley said, these are his words, "The only way I was going to be able to do this was simply to ask God to come along with me." And so he made the prayer. He created a prayer, kind of like a Marine cadence chant. He created the prayer, "Jesus, Mary, get me there. Jesus, Mary, get me there." So there he is, hanging from the bridge, hand walking, placing these explosives. And also, I didn't mention, but there were North Vietnamese on the other side of the river firing at him as he's hand walking underneath the bridge.
Wow.
So you have small arms fire, and his buddies in the South Vietnamese Marine Battalion are also trying to help him. They're shooting back, providing some covering fire, but he was getting small arms fire, and eventually a tank round even hit close to him and almost knocked him off the bridge.
And Mr. Zechariah, talk about they forgot he didn't have a crimper to crimp the explosives. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so he got all the explosives rigged, and then he had to crimp them, which I don't know. Basically that means he had to set them ready to explode. And but he didn't have the tool. So he had been through Ranger School, and Ranger School, they had taught him to use their teeth. But like Adrian was saying, that wasn't so easy. That if you crimped, if you pressed down too hard, you could set the explosive and you're biting on it, so you'd be jelly at that point. So he had to do that with his teeth. He had to crimp the explosive with his teeth. At least 10 of those, and he did all of them perfectly. He did it perfectly. So it was absolutely incredible. Several things. Before he crawled out to the bridge, he had to crawl through concertina wire, so his feet were torn up. And then when he was hand walking, he had forgotten to take off his equipment. So he had his rifle, he had all of his military equipment, his magazines. Wow. That's heavy, really heavy. So he was holding his own weight as well as the weight of his equipment. Absolutely incredible. But I think what's most important, what's most beautiful, is the prayer he came up with, and it's such a very easy, very down to earth prayer, but in the moments of danger, it's what we need to pray to get us through it. And he's a really good example for us Catholics, for everyone.
We're talking with Zechariah Long from the American Society for the Defense of Tradition, Family, and Property, TFP. And we're talking about this incredible story of an American knight, Colonel Ripley. And I posted, if you're interested in some of the links that we're discussing today, even though Tim Mott is not in today, he's off for Memorial Day, and so is David Magallanes. We're sort of making do here. So I have been posting links in our live chat going on the Facebook side. So if you're interested, you can go to facebook.com/GRN Online, and you can see today's episode of GRN Alive Monday, and you can see the links that I'm posting there. But I posted links to the ballad, to the video to the ballad. I've also posted a link to the book, The American Knight, as well, and also stories related to what I talked about earlier, especially about Vicksburg and Joseph LaBille and Father Vincent Capodanno. And so we're talking about heroic combination between faith and the difficulties that we have to face, the challenges in life. And I got to wrap the coronavirus into all of this. If there's a way to do that, I'm about to try. And one of the things that I've personally struggled with in all of what we've been dealing with the last several months is there just seems to not really be a lot of supernatural faith going around. It seems like we have a very pragmatic, very practical outlook on all of our challenges in life, but not enough supernatural faith. And I think of Father Vincent Capodanno and the many testimonies from eyewitness accounts that said he walked upright from foxhole to foxhole, bullets whizzing by his head, and he would look them in the eye and he would say to them calmly, "Don't worry, Marine, God is with us all today." And just act, and his arm was nearly blown off, and he just continued on, walking from foxhole to foxhole, carrying Marines, praying over the dead, rendering aid, comforting. I mean, he would just, same thing with Colonel Ripley. He had a mission to do. He engaged his faith, and he saw to the task. Adrian.
Yeah, I thought Mr. Zechariah could talk a little bit about him being off the battlefield, because I know when I was reading the book, it seems as though what he's really, some of the most heroic things he did, and what he considered himself to be more heroic, was the things he did off the battlefield.
Absolutely, very good point. And you're totally right. What he did off the battlefield is more heroic. So Colonel Ripley, after the Don Haw Bridge, and he was an instructor at the Naval Academy in Annapolis, and while he was there, the whole issue of allowing homosexuals in the military came up, and Colonel Ripley gave a testimony in front of a congressional committee about banning homosexuals from the armed forces, and he gave it in obviously a very civil, very polite, very legal way, but that took a lot of moral courage to stand up. His career could have been sacked, but he did it anyways. Another example is Hollywood approached Colonel Ripley to ask him if they could make a movie on him. It would make a great movie, that's for sure. But Colonel Ripley gave two requirements. The first was that his character had to remain faithful to his wife in the movie.
Amen.
Yeah, all right.
Praise be to Jesus.
The second was that his character had to use clean language, could never utter a foul language, because Colonel said, I never dirtied myself with those two things.
Let me tell you, I served in the Marine Corps. You stand out like a sore thumb if you do not curse like a Marine. Yes. I'm just telling you.
Yes.
That's, wow. Praise be to Jesus.
Yep, and of course, Hollywood being Hollywood never made the movie.
It's fascinating you bring that up. Let me take a side tangent just really quickly here, somewhat related to that. So I've had the incredible honor of sharing the story of Sergeant Roy Benavides, who similarly did not die in combat, although they tried very hard to kill him several times. I've shared his story on this radio program in the past. I've also had the wonderful honor of speaking to his family members. His daughter has been a guest on my show. I spent time with his nephew. It's been an honor to really. I met him when I was 17 years old. At any rate, similarly, Roy was a faithful Catholic. He wasn't a perfect Catholic, but he was a faithful Catholic. And when he died, he had some very famous friends, let's just say, because he spent the last years of his life touring the country and the world, trying to get kids like me to stay off drugs. And so he met a lot of people, and after Ronald Reagan gave him the Medal of Honor. And so he had an actor friend who promised to make his movie after he died. His actor friend never made the movie. So years and years passed. And the actor friend, whose name I don't want to give out, sold the rights to the movie to the producers who made We Were Soldiers, which is the company that Mel Gibson owns. And the family gave me an opportunity to send those producers an email. I never got a reply, but the idea was, and I said, they said they would forward the email on I sent to them. And what I said to them was, I think you're the right team to make an incredible movie about this man's life. But if you make a movie about a man who did something heroic and his faith wasn't first and foremost prime place in the storyline, then you will have robbed Roy's legacy, because that's who Roy was. Roy did what he did because of his faith and who he is. So similarly, Colonel Ripley, I'm very proud of him for standing his ground and saying, yeah, it's great to have these stories told, but if you're going to tell a story other than what it really was, then what's the point, right?
Absolutely. There's no atheist in the foxhole, and Colonel Ripley, like you said, I think Colonel Ripley's story is great, and that's why we promote it so much, is because it's a very good example of how the spiritual warrior, the spiritual life, is a very important element in the physical warrior, being a man, being a real man.
Amen.
And so you cannot separate the two.
Turn your mic on, Teresa.
As
no producer today.
As y'all were talking about supernatural faith, it reminded me of a video that the Catholic Vote actually posted recently, or today rather, that about Father Tim Vacok, saying that he had supported the 44 Corps Support Battalion, and he had been involved with them and served with them. And on his the 12th anniversary of his priesthood, he actually, rather than being at home with his congregation, at home, he was out serving them, and he went out to the field and served mass. And on his way back, his vehicle exploded. They hit a bomb on the road, and so he actually was wounded very, and he ended up dying years later from those wounds. But he was quoted as saying, "The safest place for me to be is in the center of God's will, and if that's in the line of fire, that's where I will be."
Amen.
And I mean, that just really hit me, because I was like, how many times do we have those little moments in our daily life where we're like, I feel like I'm under fire, and I feel like I don't deserve to be here, or I feel like I'm having to take a step forward to defend someone that I may not even know personally.
Right.
And there we are. We have that opportunity. And so in those little moments, we can remember our brave soldiers who are laying down their lives. We're not actually dying for this. And sometimes we can think like, well, it'd be easier to die than to like have to live with this. But the reality is, it's those little decisions that give us the courage to be that martyr for the faith, that give us the courage to be, to build that better world.
Yeah, amen. And we only have about a minute left here, and I wish I had more time, because I was just thinking of trustful surrender to divine providence when you were talking about that, Teresa. So maybe in the after show we'll talk about that a little more. But we're just about out of time here in our conversation with Zechariah Long from the American Society for the Defense of Tradition, Family, and Property. And again, I have linked to the ballad, the ballad of the American Night. I've also linked to the book. And we're going to be linking to TFP.org. Is there a better website, Zachariah? Where would you encourage people to go to learn more about the TFP?
Oh, no, that's exactly it. TFP.org is our official website. I mean, we have many websites. ReturnToOrder.org is another one if you want to put on there. But, yes, TFP.org explains our organization and everything we do. Absolutely.
Well, Zechariah, thank you for your time today. I'm really grateful to you to be on with us, to share the story of Colonel Ripley, and also share the work of the TFP. I think it's very important work. It reminds me of just the need for, especially for young men in particular, to stand up, to be fervently Catholic, to love others so much that you would be willing to stand out and to pray and to protest that which is an injustice in society, and to stand up for that which is right. And I think TFP is doing that. So thank you for that, Zechariah.
No, thank you, Joe. It's the call of knighthood in each of our souls. So that's what we desire to be, American knights.
Amen. Amen. Praise be to Jesus Christ. Okay, so Zechariah, you're welcome to hang out if you'd like. We're going to go off the air, and then we'll be back on the after show. If you'd like to hang out, you're welcome to. But I'm going to place you on hold. We're about to leave all across the Guadalupe Radio Network, and I want to wish you and your family an incredible day. But I really want to emphasize the need to stop and remember Memorial Day for its true purpose and intent. To think of those that have given that last full measure, those that have laid their life down for the defense, the service of others. Combat, for war, for the most part, is a terrible thing. We should try to avoid it at all costs. But you know what? When we do, if we send those who have to fight, we should send them in a state of grace, and we should pray for them and encourage them to live good and holy lives.
Thank you for listening to GRN Alive.
From the studios of the Guadalupe Radio Network.
For more faith, fun, and facts,
Join our email list.
just text the letters GRN to the number 42828. That's GRN to the number 42828.
And take Jesus wherever you go this week.
Welcome to the after show, where we let our hair down and we talk about the stories that we talked about on the regular radio broadcast. And some of us have more hair than others, so praise be to Jesus for that. Zechariah is not on the radio on the line with us anymore, so it's just us. But It was kind of an emotional show in the beginning, not for you, but for I'm an emotional guy, but I still got caught up by it.
But I mean, like, there's a lot to be said for living it. There's a lot to be said for people will come out and they'll pray with me and they'll say, wow, I didn't realize it was going to be like this until I was here. And then they'll have that personal encounter. And for you, you have that personal encounter with these people who are risking their lives and who pass away. And it's wonderful, the fact that they show that heroism. I know that one of the things I love about TFP and our guests, actually, is the fact that they see themselves as the knights. In a sense, they have that peaceful role in standing up for our rights, for religious liberty specifically, and being that voice in a very peaceful, legal way. So if you're someone that's like, I really, we want to avoid war, we want to avoid, but we need to be able to address this tension in a peaceful and engaging way, TFP is your place to go for addressing, issues like homosexuality, for issues like abortion and religious freedom. And so they're very informed, they're very active, and it allows you to participate and to really stand out. And for a lot of people, I guess for me, I grew up in a very activist type family,
really?
Which I didn't realize. I mean, like, because it's normal, like you just kind of grow up around it.
House,
oh, yes, we did. Yes, we did. And just kind of.
I want steak. That would have been me. I would have protested the food.
I think that would be the next protest I'm going to go to is protesting veganism.
Yeah. Give me meat.
And so it's kind of
Or
funny
give me
because I
death.
I have that understanding, like, kind of on a more ingrained. So even if I don't agree with them, I'm like, oh, I get the fact that this is how you see yourself standing up. But as soon as they're not peaceful, then I don't really have a lot of patience for it.
How many times?
Because it's like you're not doing it right. Like we're in this country, we're having that civil conversation. This is a totally different place. Like if you're starting to say, oh, well, we need to turn to violence, like. Okay, the only place that's really reasonable is if you are defending someone's life from someone who's being attacked. If you're the one that's being aggressive just because you think that this is going to affect you later down the line, then that's not the same
You've
thing.
been down to Planned Parenthood 14 billion times because that's part of your work.
Yes.
I've only been there a handful of times. I might go once or twice a year, if that. So I go, but it's like the few times that I had been there, to see a guy on a bullhorn screaming and yelling at women, I'm like, dude, who thought that was a good idea?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Well, and that's one of the things that's going to come out a lot with this whole issue around Norma McCorvey right now is the fact that they're like, well, these people were doing a terrible job of this, that, and the other. They were, and even Robert, and I'm forgetting his last name, he came out saying that he went from working with Operation Rescue to saying that here he is, Robert, I'm going to pronounce this wrong,
Let's go with it. Just run with it.
So he said that he used to be pro-life and now he is open to women choosing abortion. And the reality is, like, those stories are very few and far between. And the reality is a lot of pro-life groups have said, you know what, we have learned from our mistakes. We were trying to defend the unborn because we knew they were actually being killed. So we were putting our body in the line in the line of defense to, if we were going to be arrested, we were going to be arrested.
Yeah.
And there's still people that do that. And the reality is, there are now organizations like 40 Days for Life. There's now organizations like Sidewalk Advocates for Life, us at Houston Coalition for Life, where we train, like, there's ways to address this issue without crossing the legal lines, without actually breaking the law. And so it's important to be able to get involved in these, or TFP, and address these issues in a legal fashion. And because it actually does change law, and because we actually see the benefits from that, we see people coming out like Abby Johnson, Dr. Haywood, there's 20. I can think of 20 people that I had written up about before, and it's just the importance is the factor of love, and we can never underestimate the power of the change that can happen and conversion that can happen because of that activity. So
I've had the privilege of going out with the TFP a number of times to a different protest. I went to A&M with them, been to the Black Mass with them. You were there too, Joe.
Well, not attending, but outside.
Right, outside.
For audience clarification.
I also wasn't at the drag queen show at A&M either. We're outside the drag queen show. And we've gone to a number of pro-life rallies, rosary rallies that they've done.
Yeah, they're always at the March for Life every year.
They're always at the March for Life. I saw them there in D.C. this year, and I went with them to Austin. I went with them to Austin this year as well. And it's just the sense of sacred is always there, where it's not it's always prayerful, but there's also a militarism with it as well, like the way they walk, the way they carry themselves,
and that's important.
The way that they have it lined up, their prayers are very specific. They kind of chant in a way at certain points, so they give you the opportunity to engage verbally.
I know there are folks that would hear us talking about this, and they might even be like horrified, like, "What? Well, you're so judgmental." Listen, let's talk about charity for a second. Charity. What is love? Well, love died on a cross because God is love. 1 John chapter 4, verse 8. Love died on a cross to save your soul. The greatest act of charity is to bring truth. Truth is a person, right? John 15. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. To bring Jesus to people that died for you on the cross, that gift of love is sacrificial, and it bears to the truth. Right? It never bears to falsehood. It never bears to error. It bears to truth. And God's word will never return void. What am I saying? I'm saying this. If we truly love the world, then we've got to help the world wake up before it's too late. If you truly love your neighbor, you've got to help your neighbor wake up before it's too late. Because once they die, that's it. There's no second chance. Okay, purgatory is not a second chance. There's no people who are going to go to purgatory that would have been destined for hell, right? So it's important for us to, in great charity and truth and love, to love our neighbors so much that we would be willing to say the hard things and do the hard things. And I think the TFP speaks to that.
Well, and I gave a talk to teenagers about voting and the importance of being aware of, what the Catholic Church teaches regarding voting. And one of them asked me, well, didn't Pope Francis say that we should be more loving, like we've been so mean to homosexuals and like we need to embrace more cultures? And I said, look, I have worked with women who are in crisis pregnancy situations who I worked with one woman who was a prostitute, and I can look at her and I could be really harsh and it would be terrible, and I did not do this, but I could say something like, oh, how dare you, or how could you, or what were you thinking? Or we could look at her and say, look, this is hurting you. This is hurting you psychologically. It's hurting you physically. It's putting you in danger in a lot of situations. Like, how can we help you to find a better level of income? How can we help you to see the value in your sexuality? Yeah. How can we help you to get better clothes? Like, is it a cost issue?
Right.
Like, how are you being trafficked? Like, trying to help her get to safety. And similarly with homosexuality, like there's a great movie that came out called The Third Way. Mm-hmm. I highly recommend, especially if you're dealing with people who are vehemently pro-homosexual, like look at that video, because there are psychological issues that are in for many situations.
Well, even in the transgender issue, the suicide rate is off the charts.
And it's not because they're being bullied, it's because there is a psychological issue.
One time we were at U of H. I was with the TFP at U of H on pamphleting about homosexuality against gay marriage. And we were and someone went up to us, started talking to us, and had mentioned about that she was transgender. And they were like, well, I'm so sorry to hear that. And they were like, what do you mean you're so sorry to hear that? He's like, yeah, the transgender the suicide rate for transgender people is astronomically high.
Astronomically high.
And the person, the man's friend was like, oh my gosh, that's not true. Isn't that's terrible? But the transgender person went up and said, no, that actually is true, but I'm okay. Yeah.
One of the groups that's addressing this a whole lot is LifeSite News. So they actually recently did an interview with a man who is no longer acting as a transgender person. He is now reverted to being a man, he was born a man. So if you're interested in reading more about transgender issues and homosexual issues and how it's being addressed on a civil level, LifeSite News is covering that a lot.
The point before we went down the rabbit hole, the point I was originally trying to make in thinking about TFP and what they do and why I think it's important is when I have the chance to speak to priests personally and just have like a one-on-one conversation. So if I had this opportunity to speak to a priest or a bishop, I would say this. What the lay folk really need to know, whether you tell them or not, you got to show it to them. Not say, show, not tell, do. We got to know that you are madly in love with the faith, madly in love with the Lord. I mean, like, you're willing to die like Father Vincent Capodanno tomorrow for the faith, right? We need to know that. We need to see it. It needs to be demonstrated in every pore and fiber of your being. Lay folk need that, number one. Number two, and again, this is to bishops and priests. We need to know that you have supernatural faith, right? Absolutely. That you don't see the world through the world's lens, the pragmatic, practical, worldly lens, that you see the world through the lens of your faith. Like that's St. Paul telling us we are not dealing with the flesh, we're dealing with the principalities. This is a spiritual combat, and your love for our souls to get to heaven is far greater than your love for my belly to be full of food.
Well,
right?
and I think that we're seeing a lot of priests
well,
that are
hold on.
showing that.
Can I just finish the point? And this is the point. If you want young men, and even I argue young women, to come alive in the faith, to recapture society, to help evangelize the world and bring good, the true, and the beautiful, truth itself to people who are hurting, dying, confused, and wounded, then we need to see courage and supernatural faith. Men, especially men who have grown up addicted to pornography, who have been emasculated through their father and mother wounds, they do not see, they do not witness supernatural faith and courage. They are not going to come alive. They are not leaders by default, they are followers. They're going to follow a hook and step everything they see around them, and it's up to you, my dear brother priests and father bishops. It's up to you to lead supernaturally and courageously if you want those people to come alive. And people like the TFP, I think, are like, remember those videos that came out of Spain 2-3 years ago of men locking arms to defend the cathedral?
Oh man, that was amazing.
And these lesbian women, shirtless, just spitting in their eye and doing all this vile, disgusting things. And the men, they didn't react with punches or blows or foul mouth. They hooked arms and they prayed and they held the line.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I see with the TFP. Mr. Evan, he's one of the guys in the Houston area that's with them. He was telling me a story of when he went to Brazil to help the Brazilian TFP. There was a case where they were out there playing a trumpet. One of the guys was playing a trumpet, and this communist rides by cursing them and grabs the trumpet from his mouth and yanks it out, breaking his teeth.
Wow.
And this, they said that in America, they're just very fortunate because, just American society, their law and order, that the worst that happens to them in America is they get spit on, they get cursed at.
Right.
But he said whenever they travel internationally,
It's
especially
physical.
in South America, they get attacked. They had told me how one time one of the guys got bashed in the back of the head with a rock. And so whenever they're in South America, they're always on edge, like looking out, being prepared to be attacked. And these guys, they tell me these war stories of them out there.
No, they don't respond with blows.
And no, they don't. Unless it's absolutely necessary, they just they take it and they pray and they try to record it because they want to show the people like this is the opposition. We're out here being peaceful and prayerful, and they're the ones attacking us. And so it's pretty amazing to see how they endure that.
Now there are, to your point, Teresa, there are incredible priests and even bishops who have spoken courageously, acted courageously, and they have inspired. But we need more, not less, right? There was a homily that came out from a priest from La Crosse, Wisconsin, a week and a half ago. And, he's an obedient priest in good standing. He had to turn people away from his mass because his bishop asked him to, and so that's what he did. But he was so angry. He was so, he's just like, this isn't right. What we need most is sacramental grace. And to be dealing with this, the church scandal, and now on top of that, dealing with this lack of supernatural courage and faith, it was just a bridge too far for him. And he spoke out in this passionate homily that inspired me. And so I shared it on my Facebook feed. And, it upsets some people. And I'm sorry it upsets. I'm not looking to upset anybody. But at the same time, priests and bishops, their mission is for souls, not for the physical well-being primarily. That's a secondary goal.
Well, and this is something that you mentioned also before the show began, which is, wasn't it the Bishop of Michigan?
Minnesota.
Minnesota, excuse me. I couldn't remember which one I was like.
It was
one of the ones
Hebda.
up north.
Hebda came out and he's like, that's it, we're done. Because the governor of Minnesota, he was forbidding people of faith to get together. Like there was nothing to prohibit, and they cautiously stepped back and said, "Okay, we're going to step back, and we're not gonna we're going to suspend public masses for a time," even though the governor didn't forbid it. But then, when they were ready to open up, the governor came out and said, "No, we forbid it." Liquor stores, yes. Walmart, absolutely. No problem on some of this other stuff. But people of faith, absolutely not. And so the bishops in Minnesota were like, "Okay, we're done. We're going to defy you, whether you like it or not." And by the grace of God, the governor backed down.
And it shows the power of bishops.
Right.
Like the bishops have the authority in the temporal world. That they have this authority, and they rarely ever exercise it. And we show that like whenever the government shuts down one Protestant church, what are they shutting down? They're shutting down one Protestant church. But if they try to lock down the Catholic Church, they're going against a monolith. Against something that's international, something that has authority, something that has power, something that is instituted by Christ himself. And so whenever bishops especially stand up to defend the faith, it's powerful. It's amazing.
Yes.
Well, and I'm thinking how, because they also had the legal aid of the Becket Fund right there saying, hey, look.
That helps.
It helps, exactly. And so, people need to keep in mind that there are legal systems involved here in the United States. This is where we're at. And that there is a method to saying, look, you cannot hold the Catholic Church or any church as secondary in the addressing of the public sphere. And the reality is, I had a friend who was like, well, the reason... She's obviously not Catholic. She said, well, the reason is the churches are closed because you can pray to Jesus anywhere. And I'm thinking, you can't buy Jesus at Walmart. You can't buy Jesus anywhere.
You get the candles.
You can't
you buy the candles.
You can go to the doctor's office and they can help you heal physically, but they cannot raise your spirit from the dead. They cannot. You cannot get confession anywhere except at church.
I gave a Bible study to a group out of California last week, and they asked me to show typology. As Saint Augustine said, the new is hidden in the old, and the whole old is revealed in the new. And they wanted to talk on biblical typology and where Jesus was hidden in the old. And so it was fun because I used to geek out on that stuff all the time in my days back at Fullness of Truth. And so it's been a while. And so
what a Catholic hack.
I enjoyed it.
I like typology.
But and if you go back and you look at it, and there was a lot of people in that group who weren't Catholic. They were actually on their way into Catholic. And the organizer who invited me was like, man, that was so good because they had never seen that design laid out for them like that. And this is my point to what you were saying. Is when you look at the design, the intent of the Lord to go through and bring about the regathering of the 12 tribes and bringing about the 3 inner circle and the 12 and the 70 and the sacraments, and you see how it was hidden in the old and now is brought to fulfillment in the new. The intent of the Lord was his church from the Garden of Eden. That was his intent from the beginning, and the sacraments poured out for us through his grace, the sacrament of the Holy Eucharist, a confession being among the greatest. He intends for us to receive these, to have the grace for the journey on our way through this wilderness to heaven. If we don't have access to that stuff, how can you even make it through today without committing venial sins? And the more venial sins, aren't you more apt to commit a mortal sin?
I'm pretty sure that it's actually condemned to say that you can overcome venial sin without the grace of God.
See my point?
Yeah.
Yep.
See my point?
You can't do anything without the grace of God.
Only with God can we do anything.
Right.
And his intention was to give us the sacraments. His last words, and going to a TLM on Ascension Thursday. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, hint, hint.
I don't know if we should
make Ascension Thursday.
This is an entire tirade.
When you go through the gospel on Ascension Thursday at the TLM, it was it was our Lord's words: "Go forth, make disciples of all nations, baptize them." That's the intent of the Lord, is to bring about conversions of every soul, because God loves every soul so much that he's willing to to endure long sufferings of sins committed to offend him.
I just want to go back to something you said earlier because this reminded me of that. It was you were talking about like raising strong men and things like that, and this emasculated culture. And one of the things that that the TFP is like one of their mission is the restoration of Christian society. And one of the things, the way they do that is through the chivalry camps where they have with kids. They do sword fighting demonstrations and all these different things. And it's really cool.
It is really cool.
And I was thinking about it. I was like, why on earth have I not told Joe to bring his kids out here and teach them how to sword fight? Yeah, they learn a single stick.
My kids do lots of sword fighting, actually.
There's a stick right there.
I believe it.
They probably don't even need a sword.
And then they do demonstrations where they get real swords and use them to cut up jugs.
It's important for
awesome.
boys to experience that. Boys in particular, if you're going to raise boys, it's difficult because boys are more rambunctious and physical, but they need that.
Right.
And more importantly, they need a father figure in their life to lead them and guide them and demonstrate what it means to be a man. And many of us, myself in this category, we grew up in broken homes, and nobody demonstrated to us what it meant to be a good husband and father and a man. Nobody demonstrated to us what it meant to be sacramentally sacrificial for someone else. And so guys like me have been emasculated since our childhood, and we're like blind people groping in the dark to figure it out. And here we have sons, and we're like,
what do I do with these guys?
I mean, good grief, I feel bad for these kids.
And that's really important because
these kinds of activities are important for them.
Part of it is the physical activity of it, but on top of that as well, at the same time, they talk about the chivalrous virtues of knighthood.
Yes.
And one of the things that they talked about, which really struck me, because I was at one of their demonstrations for kids. I was there listening to them talk, and they were telling the kids, they're like, what can anyone become a knight? And people were like, yeah, anybody. And he's like, no, only a Catholic can be a knight. Because the virtues of a knight are directly related to the virtues of being a Catholic. And they talked about how the sword, that they specifically designed the sword of the knight to look like a cross. Where you look at like the French swords later on, whenever they moved past Catholicism, they had having these guards that cover your whole hand, which are more effective in guarding your hand. But the knights would always stick to the crossbar because they wanted it to look like a cross. Because that was their weapon. Yes.
Makes me think of a rabbit hole I could go down easily right now, but the Knights Templar. But,
well, before we go down another rabbit hole, I would also like to point out, like, it's great that we now have groups like... now I'm forgetting it. That Man Is You, because you have that ability to have that camaraderie and have that structure, so that way you can teach your kids through that. Or even you have programs through the YMCA. You have programs through. I remember my brothers did Indian guides with the YMCA, or like you have the Boy Scouts, which hopefully will be continued to be defended
the Knights of St. George.
Yes, the Knights of St. George. But yeah, it's great to see when fathers are engaging their sons and teaching them that nobility and that ability to how do they treat women with respect? How do they show that through demonstrating it through their marriage or through how they work with their daughters, or however that, just that daily interaction, because it's not like women disappear off the face of the planet whenever they're training their sons. They're actually training their sons on how to work with women through that interaction. And so that's a great part of chivalry as well.
Yeah, and it's important. We need to do more of this, not less of this, and ultimately everything is related. Everything is cyclical in the sense that, going back to what we're talking about, priests and bishops and courageousness and all that, how do you get good and holy, courageous bishops and priests? Through the family. Mm-hmm. They don't grow on trees. They're not developed in a lab someplace. They come from families. And so if holiness and sanctity and supernatural faith is modeled at the family level growing up, they are much more likely to become good and holy, incredible priests. And again, there are many examples currently of good and holy priests and bishops that we can point to that are just inspirational. But we need more, not less. Mm-hmm. We need more.
Father Felix at Mass this Sunday during his homily said he told everybody and it was actually really very direct. I was like, yeah, go Father. He said, you're not going to be the apple of everyone's eye.
Nope.
You're not going to please everyone. And you know what? get over it. And I was like, yeah, there you go, Father. There you go.
There you go. It is very important. But again, I can't stress enough, if I were to have a conversation with a bishop or a priest, and I was able to be candid and direct and have this opportunity, I would say, you need to love the faith more than you love anything. I mean, literally anything. You have to be willing to die for her in a heartbeat for the salvation of souls.
Give me souls.
That's what
take away everything else.
Yes, the Salesian. Who knew the Salesian motto was so incredibly awesome? Say it again.
Give me souls. Take away the rest.
So backstory as we're running out of time. Let me come back to that. So let me finish the thought. Again, supernatural faith. Bishops, priests, please, supernatural faith. Total sold out for the faith. Nothing, don't love the world nearly as much. If you can't love the world enough if you don't love God above all things and his faith above all things. If you don't desire and have zeal for souls to come into the kingdom, then you simply will not love this earth and the people in it enough. Lay folk need to know that. We need to see that radiated through everything in your life. And if you do, we will follow you anywhere and everywhere. I promise you. We'll put everything on hold just to come to your rescue and to be your assistant in whatever ministry and work you are doing. Whether it's feeding the poor, clothing the naked, putting an end to abortion, or helping those who are same-sex attracted. Whatever it may be, we'll be there with you if we can see and witness your courageous supernatural faith, total commitment to the salvation of souls. That's what I wanted to say. Now, tangent before we run out of time. So I was going through bigpulpit.com. I miss Tito.
I miss Tito too.
Tito needs to come back. Make Tito great again. That's what we need. I'm teasing Tito. If you're listening, I'm only teasing you.
Hashtag bring back Tito.
I was going through bigpulpit.com, and I saw an article linked up there to religious orders in recent times, top dozen charts 2020. And what got me was that the Jesuits, since 1966, have fallen 57% in their order.
57%, wow.
And they're not alone. Benedictines and Franciscans, very similar numbers, 52%, 48%. So these top major orders have nosedived in membership since 1966. Mm-hmm. And again, I've said this before many times. If you really want to go through the statistics, go to CARA, Google CARA, C-A-R-A, Google Georgetown University, Catholic statistics. You'll find it. Read them for yourself. You can see what we're talking about.
Man, I wonder what happened in 1966.
So when the church...
When was the TV invented?
...was going through all of this, the last 50 years, if you were the CEO of this organization and the numbers were nothing but nosedive, crash, and burn, you wouldn't have your job very long. You just wouldn't, right? I gave this talk to a group of Catholics at a dinner, and the guy who runs it is a retired Marine colonel. And I read these statistics. I didn't make these statistics. They're not mine. They're the church's, USCCB's. And I read them, and I said, Colonel, I said, if your division was run and like this, and these were the results, how long would you be colonel of that division? He said, not even for a day. They'd fire me, run me out of town. And yet this is the case. And so the last 50 years, like the Jesuits, the Franciscans, the Benedictines, nosedive in statistics. And we'll link to it.
I think a lot...
Let me finish this off real quick. So I'm looking at this chart, and I noticed that one line is like more flat and horizontal.
Yeah.
And everything else is like crash and burn. And I was like, well, who's this flat and level one? And I looked at it, and then all I'm given is the initials, SDB. And I said, Adrian, who's the SDB? And he's like, the Salesians. And I went, really? I didn't see that coming.
Yeah, me neither.
And then he read the motto.
Yep. Give me souls, take away the rest.
And I'm like, oh, well, with a motto like that, it kind of makes sense. So God bless the Salesians. Go ahead.
I think a lot of the challenge, though, with vocations, and I've heard this from many locations, including from Cardinal Sarah, and that is that we have to be able to have time to be quiet and to still our soul so that way we can hear God's voice. Because if we don't get used to hearing God's voice, then we won't be able to hear that call to confession. And I remember when I was going to Magdalen College, that was one of the things that I had a fellow classmate who said, we can really hear God really loud up here. And I said, it's true, because we had no television in the dorm. We had no cell phones except in certain times. Like, there was a lot of just quiet and time for reflection and time for prayer and time to really listen to the person that was next to us. And so with all of that reflection, of course, you're going to hear God's voice more. Yeah. So, and then you recognize it more, and then you get fired up whenever you hear someone leading leading us astray while claiming to teach the faith. And so I really want to encourage you to take this time during COVID-19. You might feel like, how am I going to find more time to get quiet? But just try to take more time to pray the rosary or have that spiritual reflection time. And, look at it, form.org. I know that's become very popular, and their ratings have gone way up. So
I have
keep
an
it
admission.
going.
I have an admission as we say goodbye.
Uh-oh.
I've started watching Chosen.
Oh, great. I haven't. I promised like 3 people I would, and I still haven't started it yet.
I've dragged my feet.
I'm going to.
I'm pretty sure. So I thought I was the last Catholic. Apparently I'm not. You two are.
I still haven't.
So
I'm 5 minutes in.
So then
the
5
first
minutes.
episode.
So
I
you've
almost
checked
did
them
that,
out.
and then I was like, I could say it. I was like,
So
no.
Teresa is the last Catholic on planet Earth to not watch Chosen.
That's the plan.
So I gave in.
So
And
next week we're gonna see where I'm at.
I only gave in because certain people that I trust and know personally who have watched it have said it's good. It's not terrible.
Well, and Dave Palmer interviewed Jonathan this past on Monday, and I was so impressed with that interview that I was like, okay,
but I'm a snob.
One more reason. I know, but
I'm a movie
I have
snob.
a really
It's true,
hard
you are a
time.
snob.
I have a hard time watching films about Jesus because I'm like,
Yes.
it's just I'm
So
like,
I'm not
it's
alone.
you, it's somebody
I'm not
else,
alone.
like. And so, yeah,
It's good.
It's not
It's
just
good to
you.
feel like I'm not the only snob in the room when it comes to movies about our Lord and our Lady.
Well,
Now, I got to say, so I've watched 3 episodes, and I can't tell you how I feel because we're out of time.
Oh,
we'll have to
we'll have to cover it next week whenever
no.
I will have
But,
a chance to watch it.
The good, the bad, the pros,
Be
the
part of my homework.
cons, the pitfalls. Maybe we'll have a conversation next
The
time.
heresy.
The
No, I'm just
heresy.
kidding.
No. There's some good stuff in there. And there's some like, what? But it's good stuff, too. Cliffhangers. All right. So with that, God bless you all. Thanks for hanging out with us today on Memorial Day. Hopefully you're going to have a great day, and hopefully you'll take some time to remember those who have given the last full measure. I posted all the links to everything we discussed today at facebook.com/GRN Online. Even though Tim wasn't here and David wasn't here, we pulled it off. So thank you, Teresa Kamara.
Well, thank you, Joe.
HoustonCoalition.com. Adrian Fonseca from doesn't have a website, but just
he
graduated.
will soon. Watch.
Graduated.
My website, Catholic
Celt.
Conversations.
Magnum cum laude. I mean, what are you? What top 10%? 5%?
Yeah,
1%?
I got magna cum laude. I was 0.03 points off from summa cum laude.
Really?
I was very upset. 0.03.
0.03.
Yep.
That's right.
Praise be to Jesus. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Looking forward to the final result there. And with that, I wish you all a great day. We'll be praying for you. Hope you'll be praying for us too. God bless you.